So, one of the things that I've tried doing, both in my academic writing and in fiction, is to just kind of discuss this issue of centralized control. And I'm not just talking about in a country, I'm talking about global centralized control. And basically, what I was doing with that was discussing the dangers of such a system, a top down pyramid style system where the power was centralized at the top, and all the other people in the world would just be answering to that one power at the top. And how that would look would be that maybe there would be nations still, but those governments would be puppet governments that didn't really have any actual control. But their job was to exert the control of the top on their people. And what I'm looking at in our own world looks a lot like that. And it's a situation where people don't actually have popular sovereignty. Because if you elect a government that essentially is owned and controlled by governing systems above them, then do those people actually have any say in their government? Or are they just going through the motions of pretending they have a say in their government? But essentially, if that top element in this global pyramid scheme decided that they didn't like these particular people, what would happen? Would there's lower levels of government actually protect their people? Or would they just step aside and basically do the bidding of those higher echelons? And several years back, I had somebody say to me or hint that what I was writing about was conspiracy theory. And I thought that was pretty interesting. And I looked into it and found out that what we know of as New World Order was considered conspiracy theory. But I found that to be very strange, considering I was studying this academically and considering there's all sorts of resources, entire books, academic works talking about how to create this new world order and how to end nation states. And since my original avenue of study was looking at a nation, Great Britain, that was rejecting the New World Order, and their way of rejecting it was with Brexit. And when I originally studied it, there was all sorts of very convincing. And basically, what they were describing was how they were electing a parliament, but their representatives were kept so busy and had so many things they had to vote on that none of them actually had any time to even think about what they were voting on. And instead, they were staffers and people that worked for them that decided what their vote would be. So that was one of the problems. And there were many others. But after this person said this to me, I decided to go back and look at those sources, or rather, look for them, because all the very convincing arguments that I had found before that were against New World Order, and basically all that I could find that wasn't buried somehow or disappeared were arguments against Brexit and talking about how horrible that decision was. And to me, it kind of seems like the record of what people were saying and the record of the studies and everything that was going on at that time has just kind of disappeared, so that it just shows the one side, the side that supports centralized top down authority. And I just found it kind of curious and interesting This something I studied academically and that was being talked about so openly was now being called a conspiracy theory, and that all of the arguments against creating this top down pyramid scheme type of world governance was just disappeared somehow. Kind of like they still wanted that New World Order thing to exist, but just for people not to see it and not to talk about it and not to have any way of conceptualizing any arguments against it.